Welcome to Homegrown Wealth, where we're turning real estate knowledge into lasting prosperity. I'm your host, Jill Coleman, and today we're going to tackle one of the most important steps in the home buying process: how to find the right lender and agent combo. Today, we have joining us Catherine Ridings, a mortgage banker who I've worked with for years. Catherine has been in the mortgage industry working alongside her husband, Joel, for 7 years. She started off as his transaction coordinator and has since become licensed as a mortgage banker. She loves serving our community and help building generational wealth through real estate. So in today's episode, we're going to break down how to find professionals that you can trust, like Catherine and myself. What makes a great lender-agent partnership work, and how this combo can save you time, stress, and money. Hi, Catherine. Welcome to the Homegrown Wealth Show.
Hey, Jill, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, Catherine, tell us why it's important to have a great lender-agent relationship.
Yeah, so it's definitely important to have a level of trust for sure. I mean, this is the biggest purchase that most people make in their life. So you want to be sure that it's somebody that you can trust and that will give you good advice. And they care about your needs and your wants in the process.
So let me ask you this, because we have been working together for so many years, and I know personally how great you and Joel are, but what sets you aside from other lenders out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just taking the time to really dive in and see what the client's needs really are from their purchase. Are they having another child, or, coming out of a divorce, or just starting fresh, what their main concerns and needs are from the purchase. Just showing them that you do care and being genuine, because, that makes a big difference.
It definitely does, because I think that when it comes to a level of trust, I talked to a client last night that we're working with, and to hear that 2 to 3 years ago, she tried this experience and it just went left. There were so many variables that just went wrong that really could have been handled beforehand.
Yes.
So, them working back up the courage to now come, and she can just instantly tell the difference between our partnership versus the previous partnership that she's had. With having the right agent lender combo, it really makes it very easy as far as streamlining communication, because one, we know how to reach each other. I know, hey, if I call you and I don't get you right away, I know you're going to call me back.
That's right.
You're going to shoot me a text, so I can shoot you a quick text, however that needs to go. So when it comes to streamline communication, what are the things that you implement to make sure that the transaction is going smooth?
For sure, yeah. So we definitely make sure, of course, we have all the accurate contact info for the client as well. But we also have like a dedicated team assigned. So we have the same processor, same underwriter, same closer, and they're all included too. And we have a team email so that everybody in the process knows who you are and what you're doing and what your role is in the process. So, our transaction coordinator and things like that who help with all the document collection and everything. So that way it's streamlined, so there's not question or confusion about who's handling what or where you're at in the process.
Okay. And do you have any type of checkpoint or checklist that you give out as far as during the transaction, like, hey, contract's been submitted, or?
Yeah, for sure. So every week they do get an update on where things are. So, once there's offers been accepted, then we always get confirmation email from underwriting that goes directly to them. And then the status updates that come out each week. So if the appraisal's been ordered, or if it's actually been turned in, and what the due date is, title work, all of that. So they know every step of the way where they're at in the process.
So what would you say are questions that buyers should be asking a lender?
So I would start with, of course, what do I need to do to qualify? What are the needs? Like, is your credit score already where it should be? That's the basic start, because then you're going to know for sure whether you've got some work to do or you're going to be ready to move forward. And then just giving them different questions as far as, like, what are the terms of the loan? What is that going to look like? Is there, any penalties for paying things off early? Just any questions. I mean, there's not any dumb questions. I tell people that all the time, because especially if you're a first-time home buyer, you don't know until you know. So there's nothing wrong with, asking anything that comes up really in the process, just because, especially for first-time home buyers.
Okay. So what are red flags that they should pay attention to when speaking to a lender?
It definitely comes back to the transparency part. If there's lack of communication, you shouldn't have to wait days on end to get a response. We're all busy, but you can, of course, give people a heads up and say, hey, like you said, if I miss you, I'm going to shoot you a text. I'll call you back. So, if you feel like you're getting blown off, that's a good red flag right there. And again, just them just verbally telling you something and not willing to send it in writing or email it over for you to review. To me, that's always a red flag. A lot of times there's hidden fees or things, that they may not want you to see, and that's why they're not willing to send it over. But, and if there's not a lot of reviews, that can be a red flag. Not always, especially if you're first getting established, but if you've been in the business for a while, you should have good reviews. It's always good to do your own, due diligence to search, and just ask your friends and family too, because, being homegrown and local, obviously most people know each other here, and word of mouth is everything. So the experiences that they've had, listen to what they tell you, because they'll tell you the truth.
Oh, most definitely. So what are some red flags you've seen as far as working with real estate agents?
Yeah, for sure. So, over the last couple of years, some of the red flags that I've seen with realtors, just they're pushy into a property that the client may not necessarily be 100% sold on. That should be their decision. As the lender or the realtor, you don't want to push a client into a specific property because you think that's what's best. It needs to be about their needs. And again, the availability piece, we all have lives, we have families, but, you should still at least keep your clients updated.
Exactly.
They shouldn't have to beg you to schedule a showing or, so I've seen a lot of times the main things were just, unavailability and then just not being transparent. And things like that, not discussing the terms of what they're signing. Don't just present something and expect them to understand, dig in and kind of explain what they're signing off on. So,
oh, yeah, I can definitely say that, because with e-signature now being so popular, and the fact that you can just send an email and you can say, hey, I'm sending you something to sign. I'm very, very strict on, look, I either need you to get on the phone, or here's in text detail
that's right
on what you're about to sign, or here's an email in detail on what you're about to sign.
Mm-hmm.
I never want to send you to sign something blind to where you're like, I didn't even know I signed that.
Right, exactly. That's really important. One thing I was going to say is when, you speak to a lender and a realtor, obviously the comfort level is a big thing, but also when they take the time to make sure they understand what your needs are. But also if they're not forthcoming with, the estimates, if they're just telling you figures over the phone and they haven't really done a deep dive and they're guessing, to me, that just shows a level that they're not really committed to getting you what you need. They're just telling you what you want to hear, because there's so many pieces, as you can tell from what we've been discussing, that go into that. So it's important that they're going to take the time to actually give you accurate information and all of it, so you can make a good informed decision.
And not just parts of the estimate.
Right. Everything in full. Why not? Because you want to tell them all of the fees, everything. Disclose that up front so they're prepared, because they need to know everything that's involved. And taxes and insurance can vary, but, a lot of the fees that we disclose up front, those are mostly set depending on the loan program. Of course, if that changes, we'll adapt them. But, that way they know what to expect going in and there's no surprises. So,
and that to me is important. And I can say from the real estate agent point of view, when people come to me, I already know that there's already a heightened sense of being anxious, a lot of anxiety, because it's new. Anything new is scary.
And it's finances.
Exactly.
Correct.
So it's already those two difficult conversations that you never really want to have, that you're now starting to have.
For sure.
So I just reassure people that, hey, I'm very particular about the lenders that I work with. I want them to be honest with you. I want them to be upfront with you. I want you to fully understand what you're getting into. I don't want you to ever question, the money part, or at the last minute, down payments have changed. For some reason, I heard this yesterday from someone I was talking to who, different set of agent, different set of lender. And unfortunately, they were set to close, but for some reason, the lender keeps asking for more money. And at the very end of the transaction, that should not be the case.
No, definitely not that far in. For sure.
So I'm just like, to me, it's just it's the trust. And the reason why I can say that too, before we even started working together, I worked with other lenders. And I'm not going to say that, they weren't great or things like that, because, they were. But what I can say was that it was more full transparency that I realized coming from Joel and Catherine. So what if someone says, hey, I have this side gig on the side. Mm-hmm. Can that income be included?
Correct. And that's the big thing too. We can only use W-2 income, things that are claimed on your tax return. So if it's anything where you're paid under the table or it's cash, if there's not a way to show that and you're not claiming it on taxes, that's just not something you can use for a home purchase.
Got you. Mm-hmm. And that's really important, because we get a lot of people nowadays, with DoorDash, yes, or Instacart, they do have the side jobs, the side hustles. But I have to explain that, unfortunately, if it's not documented, if it's not on your taxes, if it's not a W-2, if it's not a 1099, unfortunately, it cannot be used.
Yes.
Now, I do want to bring this up since we just mentioned 1099.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, if someone is a 1099 employee, what's the requirement for them when it comes to trying to get a loan?
For sure. So we always look at their tax returns first, because the biggest piece is knowing what that gross income is that was actually claimed on the return. So then once we look at that after any losses or deductions, and then we're going to average that over 2 years. So you have to have had that income for at least 2 years for it to qualify.
Gotcha. So even a year and a half, if it's not that full two, unfortunately, no.
Exactly.
Okay. Mm-hmm. As you can tell, having the right team does make the process smoother. The reason being is because I can call. So as soon as I send you to Catherine, she gives me the pre-approval, which it will be in your email as well too. I'm going to call and I'm going to ask some very specific information. I'm asking the loan type. And the reason why this is important is due to the appraisal. We don't want you spending money on an appraisal that we know that the house already won't pass. As far as that goes, I need to know if you're using or needing closing costs from any seller. How much should I be asking for? I think the worst situation, and I've heard this happen a few times, is when people blindly put in an offer and they didn't really get the specifics on what their pre-approval was or what was needed as far as closing costs.
Yes.
And I think the worst feeling is, you probably had this happen, Catherine. You get an offer for one of your clients, you're excited, you get the contract, you get ready to process, and you're like, these numbers don't work.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. So, can you tell us about a time, where that's happened and just having to make that phone call, and why it's important to have an agent who's doing the necessary due diligence to make sure that you have a winning contract that can actually get through underwriting?
No, you're 100% right. Yeah, recently had that happen where, they were approved and then offered on something but didn't check with the lender first. And it was in city limits. So the estimated taxes that were included were for county, and it almost tripled in price, which pushed them over their debt to income. So, that can change depending on the specific property. So that's why it's always important to let your lender update everything based on that specific property. So it can happen.
Almost definitely. Because I know anytime we have a client, and if it's in the city or if it's in the county,
that's right.
Typically I just send you the house and I'm like, yes. Look, what does this look like?
Exactly.
Is this doable? Like, are we good?
Right.
And let me say this for the general public. It's not that every client you have to call and you have to check and verify, but there are sometimes a special case to where if you're right there with your debt to income ratio,
exactly,
it matters.
Yes.
And so you want to make sure that I'm not putting you in a position where I took you into a house that you love and you're probably never going to get over. And then Catherine turns around and say, hey guys, unfortunately, unless you have this much money to put towards the home, this is not going to work. So we always want to make sure that you're in the best position possible when you're out home shopping and ready to write and go on a contract with a home. Catherine, thank you so much for coming today and sitting down and speaking with me. I really do appreciate everything that we do together. I really appreciate our working relationship. And hopefully you guys now have a great agent-lender combo.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. I've loved growing through the business with you. Joel and I both have. So it's been really great.
I know. And guys, Joel is not here, but just know that Joel is that guy. All right, so now let's take a moment to answer some questions that our listeners sent in. So the first question is, I don't think my lender is going to work out. When is it too late to find another lender? So the best way to answer this is two parts. If you have not gone under contract on a house, so if you're still house shopping, you're still looking around, but you're already getting like delayed communication, it's just some red flags popping up. At this point, you can find another lender. Now, let's say you're under contract for a home and you didn't listen to intuition beforehand and now you are. This is really tricky, but I would say you would need to have at least within the first 2 weeks of going under contract, it would be vital to go ahead and switch if you know you want to switch. And the reason why I say that is because it's in the state contract of South Carolina that if you're going to switch lenders, you have to give notice to the seller, because if it delays the closing date, the seller has to agree to it. So you can't just switch lenders and not let the seller or the listing agent know. You have to let them know, and that closing date needs to stay the same or remain within 5, at the max, 7 business days from the original close date that you put on the contract. And if you're going to switch after you've gone under contract, documentation needs to be ready to give to that new lender immediately. Everything: bank statements, W-2s, pay stubs, tax returns. You need to have everything that you gave to that previous lender. It needs to be with that new lender the same day that you're going to make that switch. No delays, no hesitations, no calling the SQ to turn this, and that in. You have to be on top of that documentation. Now, I did say South Carolina, but if you're in other states, it's important to ask your agent what the contract states as far as switching lenders if you're already under contract and how to go about doing so. The second question, how long does it take to purchase a home? It depends. If you're a cash buyer, you can usually close within 2 to 3 weeks. If you are financing, typically the average time frame could be within 30 to 45 days. If there are delays in the process, or let's say if you're going with a program that the government has to issue a certificate in order for you to close, such as USDA, if they're backed up, it could take anywhere from 35 to 45 days, sometimes up to 60 days. But typically within 30 to 45 days is the average close time from under contract to the closing table, unless you're building a new construction. So you may find it hard to believe that buyer's agents have not always been around. Buyer agents were introduced somewhere in the 80s or 90s as far as helping buyers to purchase a home to represent the buyer's best interests. So now a buyer can hire their own agent, and a seller can hire their own listing agent. So that way that both parties can feel that their interests are being advocated for best. So the key takeaways for today: ask for recommendations and do your research. Look for professionals who specialize in the area you're looking to purchase in. Don't be afraid to interview multiple people to find the right fit for you. And trust your gut. Always trust your gut. So thank you for tuning in to today's episode on how to find the right lender-agent duo. Please make sure that you stay tuned for the next episode. And also, please like, follow, and share. Bye.